Morning, friends. Welcome back to Locally Raised. I've got my morning tea and I'm ready to spend some time in the garden and in the kitchen today. It's really wet here. It rained on and off throughout the night last night, so I'd planned to harvest some potatoes today, but I think I'll save that for a day when the garden isn't just mostly mud. So today we'll harvest some herbs and we'll dry them together, and I'm gonna harvest a bunch of mint. Let my mint go. It's gotten out of control and I want to harvest it and turn it into some tea. And I think my cucumber plant's going to have some more cucumbers for us today, which means we'll have enough to make some pickles. But before I get started, I always like to start my morning with a visit to the bees. I haven't shown you my bees yet, so let's take a trip and go see them. The bees are past the garden and on the other side of the yard, so we'll take a walk over to them. I'm keeping bees in a top bar hive, which is not the traditional boxes that you think of, the traditional Langstroth hive that many beekeepers in the US use. And so I want to show you my hive and tell you a little bit about it. I chose this hive because I read a book called The Barefoot Beekeeper, and it just got me excited about top bar hives. They seemed a little more accessible to me than learning the full Langstroth system. As a beginner, I didn't feel like I needed to take as many classes and buy as much gear to get started with this kind of hive. I know that beekeeping has a whole world full of things to learn, and I am excited to learn. But this seemed like an accessible starting point to me. Here we go. One of the reasons I wanted to use a top bar hive is because it allows the bees to build their own comb. And I'm looking forward to being able to eat our honeycomb and get all the health benefits of the bees having drawn their own comb before putting honey in it. So look at these ladies, they are busy this morning. I don't know if you can see very well, but there's definitely a lot of activity around the entrance. I'm gonna bring you around to the back. I have an observation window here. I do wear gear if I'm going to open up the hive, but to just open the observation window, the bees usually don't find that very threatening. So I'll just keep my distance and we can sort of see what's going on in there. I love that I have this window because I actually get to track their progress as they're building comb or drawing comb. You can see they're hard at work. I actually purchased this hive secondhand on the Facebook Marketplace, and then realized after I put the bees in it that it is really a poorly built hive. So John, fortunately, is handy and has the skills to build me a better hive. And I'm gonna do another video where I talk about all of the shortcomings of this hive and show you the new hive that John's building for me, and I'll show you the process of installing these bees in the new hive. All right, they're working hard. Let's go get to work ourselves. Here are my chives. I'm gonna cut some of them for drying. Here's my enormous oregano plant. It is huge, it just sprawls. And I've allowed a lot of it to go to seed because I've noticed so many bees on it. I think they really like it. And I don't need this much oregano, so it's okay if some of it goes to seed. Here you can see these parts have flowered and aren't what you would typically want for in the kitchen. But there's some new growth here that's gonna be great for harvesting and drying. And I'm actually out of oregano. My daughter has started cooking. You can't see here, but I'm air quoting. My daughter has started making recipes in the kitchen. She calls them recipes, and it's really just her emptying spices into bowls. And so I'm out of a lot of spices, and oregano is one of them. Let's get a little of this to add to our basket. This large plant right here is new to me. My mom introduced me to it. This is one of her perennials. This is called lovage, and it's in the same family as celery. It has a really similar flavor and scent to celery. It just doesn't have that stalk. The leaves have that flavor. So I'm gonna cut some of this lovage and dry it and mix it with salt and use celery salt when I'm cooking. It does smell like celery. It smells fresh and good. Here I've got 2 types of rosemary in addition to some thyme, but I'm looking at the rosemary right now. This is the traditional variety that grows in a sort of bush shape, and down here is creeping rosemary that grows low to the ground, more ground cover style. I'm gonna harvest some of both. My daughter has been heavily featuring rosemary in her recipes lately, so we are also out of rosemary. On this other side of the whiskey barrel is my thyme. My thyme is another one that I've let go to seed because it seems to make the bees really happy. I also just think it's really pretty. I like the effect it gives to that whole arrangement. So I'm actually gonna harvest some of the stuff that hasn't gone to seed to use while cooking, but I'm gonna harvest some of these blooms because I wanna dry them for tea. I've read that thyme tea offers some health benefits for the respiratory system, that it can be particularly good when you have a cough or breathing troubles, and I know that winter is coming and there will be coughs because I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and the 4-year-old starting preschool, so there will be coughs. So I'm eager for our family to try out some thyme tea and see if it's something we like, see if it's something we find soothing. It's so pretty. The last thing we're gonna harvest today is this stevia. In the past, I haven't used a lot of stevia because I don't love its aftertaste, but I've been trying to cook and bake and live with more alternative sweeteners lately. I've suddenly found that sugar has been giving me headaches, so I think I might start using more stevia, and I'll just figure out what forms I like it best in. Those are all the dried herbs that I want to harvest. Now let's go get the mint. The mint is on the lower level because this whole property is on a hill, and I'm a little embarrassed for you to see the bed that it's in because it is completely covered with weeds, but that's just how August goes. I'm spending some time harvesting and preserving, and that means I'm not spending as much time weeding. Here we are. If you've ever grown mint, you know that it will take up as much space as you give it. So we planted it, well, not we, my mom planted it down here in a space that we're happy for it to take over, and it has taken over. It's definitely time for me to get some of this cut and to do something with it. This particular variety is called Mojito Mint. I'm not enjoying a lot of mojitos this summer because I'm pregnant. We're gonna have our third baby in January. So this will have to be tea this summer and hoping for mojitos next summer. I think that's enough for a good pot of tea. The final thing I want to harvest today is some cucumbers. I'm hoping there's enough to add to what I already have and make a good batch of fermented pickles. Let's see. I haven't checked on it in a few days. These are not actually a pickling cucumber, but I'm going to use them that way anyways. There's one. Two. I've got a few more over here that are really skinny, which is kind of perfect for pickles. So even though they're small, I'm gonna harvest them. I think that's enough that we can ferment some pickles. I've got my little harvest for the day. My herbs, my mint, also an herb, but we're gonna use it differently, and my cucumbers. So let's go into the kitchen and do some cooking and some preserving. With all the overnight rain that we had, these herbs were actually damp and didn't seem to have much dirt clinging to them. So I'm just going to give each of them a rinse before I start the drying process. The herbs will tend to shrink as they dry, so I'm bundling with rubber bands fairly tightly. That way as they shrink, they'll still remain bundled and won't fall out while they're drying. There it is. I know that by tomorrow morning I will wake up and have forgotten that I did this, and this will just brighten my morning when I find it in the kitchen. I'll probably sit right over here and have a cup of tea and enjoy seeing my pretty little harvest. So just to review, we harvested chives, oregano, lovage, rosemary, thyme. This is the blooming time for tea. That time is for cooking. And stevia. Moving on to the mint, let's make some Meadow tea. I've gotten out my large pot. It's a 21 quart pot. And I've filled it maybe a third of the way full. maybe a little more. I think I've got maybe 8 quarts of water in there. I'm gonna turn it on and cover it. And while that comes to boiling, we'll wash our mint. I do not have a precise recipe when it comes to making Meadow tea. This is something my mom made when I was growing up, and it's sort of a PA Dutch standard. And so it's just something I've seen made a lot of times, and I sort of estimate it. It's not an exact science. I actually did go outside and cut just a little bit more mint because I do want this to be a large batch. So I'd say the bulk that I have here is probably the right amount that once I put it in the pot, it'll be just submerged underwater. And so that's the measurement I'll give you. Put mint in a pot and make sure it's submerged in water. So let's get this washed up. The mint leaf is the part of the plant that holds the flavor and is good for making tea. If you look online for instructions for making a fresh cup of mint tea, it will tell you to start with just the leaves. However, when I'm making a batch this large, it's just not worth the time to me to take those leaves off the stems. The stems don't offer flavor, but they also don't hurt anything. So I'm going to leave all this bulk together, save myself a lot of time, and I'll strain it out in the end. My water is boiling, so now I'm going to sweeten it before I add the tea leaves or the mint leaves. The mint leaves are going to steep for several hours, and so the water, of course, will cool as they steep. So I want to sweeten it now while the water's hot and I can really incorporate that sweetener. Traditionally, sugar is used at this point, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to use more natural sweeteners just because I don't feel great on sugar lately. So I've got some honey from a farm down the street, and as I was grabbing this, I was thinking that hopefully next summer I will be using honey from my bees to make Meadow tea. But for now, this will be a great stand-in for us, and let's get this added. I'm actually going to add the entire thing. This is a concentrate that I'm making. This is how my mom always did this. Making a concentrate so that the tea doesn't take up a lot of space in your fridge or your freezer, and you can just add water when you're ready to drink. So I'm going to make this water pretty sweet. While we're waiting on the tea to steep, I'm going to get started on this batch of pickles. I have a few cucumbers from the fridge that I harvested a couple days ago. They're already clean, and now I'll clean the ones that we harvested this morning. This recipe calls for 2 to 2.5 pounds of cucumbers. This is a recipe my sister-in-law shared with me. I've made it once before, but I'm not at all confident this is 2 pounds. I'm actually going to check and see what we've got. It's 1 pound and 15 ounces. I'll take it. I'm going with it. We'll start off by soaking all the cucumbers in an ice water bath to keep them really crisp so that we end up with crisp pickles. The recipe says to not cut the cucumbers at all, just cut off the end but leave them whole. However, I am clearly not using pickling cucumbers. I don't think the jar could manage this. So I'm going to cut them down anyways. I'll take the ends off of each and then cut them, I don't know, to 6 inches or so. Maybe that's longer than 6. And I'll put them in that bath. I started out with 10 cloves of garlic here, and I'm just slicing them to add to the brine. In this bowl, I'm making my brine. The brine starts with 5 cups of water. It is important that that water not be heavily chlorinated because chlorination will hinder or altogether prevent the fermentation process, and these are fermented pickles. So you want to use either filtered water or you can use tap water if you happen to know that your tap water isn't heavily chlorinated. I've got some filtered water here. So that's 4 cups and 5. And to those 5 cups, I'll add 2 tablespoons of salt. That's the very last of my salt. And then I'll mix that up to dissolve the salt, and that will be my brine. This recipe calls for a lot of whole spices that I don't tend to keep on hand. I bought some of them to make the recipe, but today I'm skipping the coriander seeds because I just happen to not have them. The last time that I made this, I found that most of the flavor came from the dill, the garlic, and that fermentation taste. So if you don't have some of these seeds and you're interested in making this recipe, don't let the lack of seeds stop you. Right now I'm adding fennel seeds, allspice, peppercorns, dill seeds, mustard seeds, and celery seeds. Next we'll add our cucumbers. I'm going to start by just stacking them in a layer on the bottom. Then I put my garlic in. I used 10 cloves. You could use more if you like an extra garlicky flavor. And there's the option of adding some chilies. I happen to have a couple from the garden that have been sitting in the fridge for a little while, so it's their time. And I'm gonna add a couple sprigs of dill I really like dill, so I'm gonna go heavy on the dill. And then I have a couple bay leaves that are actually from the garden as well. And then I'll top it off with one more layer of cucumbers. I'm going to pour my salt brine into the jar. I want the cucumbers to be completely covered. With fermentation, anything that pokes above the surface of the brine is vulnerable to molding. So it's important that everything stay beneath the brine. I've got a fermentation weight here, so I'm just gonna rest that on top. I'll give you a little view. So you can see that weight is gonna keep all of the cucumbers beneath the brine so I don't have to worry about molding. Now we wait. The amount of time that you allow it to ferment is completely up to your tastes. Last time mine started bubbling around 2 days. I'll leave this out on the counter so it stays out at room temperature. But I started seeing bubbles after 2 days, and bubbles mean that the fermentation's starting, that it's on the right track. And I started giving it a little taste every day and found that at 4 days, it was about the level that I like for garlickiness and dillness and fermentation, the tang of fermentation. So after 4 days, I put it in the fridge. That'll stop the fermentation process and seal in whatever flavor it is that you wanted it to be stopped at. I love how this looks. That's so pretty. So I'm gonna set that on the counter and I'll check on it in a couple days. I gave this a try after 3 hours and the mint flavor wasn't as strong as I wanted. So I've given it another hour. Now it's had 4. I'm gonna give it a taste and see where we're at. You can see the mint leaves are looking kind of sapped. They have given up their flavor, which is good. That's what I want. It tastes minty enough to be a concentrate, I think, but it's not quite sweet enough to be a concentrate. This is usually a pretty sweet tea. So, more honey. I think I'll strain this first and then put in some more honey and gently heat it to incorporate that honey. Oof, that is a heavy pot. Gonna need another bowl. press out the leaves a little bit to get the last bit of flavor and moisture out of them. And then all the liquid will go back into the pot. I'm ready to give it another try. That's good. It's too sweet right now, but it won't be once I've reconstituted it. So I'll do 1 part of concentrate to 1 part water when I'm preparing this to serve. As I mentioned earlier, Meadow tea is just sort of a standard for summer gatherings in my family and in this area. So this weekend we're having my family over, and it's perfect that I'll have Meadow tea to serve. It'll be the first time that my siblings and their spouses and my nieces and nephews and parents have all gathered here since we bought the house from my parents. So I'm happy for everybody to be able to come over and to be here now that we're living here. I have a 2-gallon drink dispenser, so if I've got 1 gallon of this concentrate, I can add another gallon of water plus ice, and that should be enough Meadow tea for our gathering. And I've still got a little bit left over here for a pitcher for our fridge and a glass for myself. Thanks for spending some time in the garden and the kitchen with me today. Feels good to have these herbs drying, and I know I'll be enjoying some pickles in a few days. And now I've got tea to serve to my family when they come over next weekend. Please like and subscribe to join me for more projects, and you can also find me on Instagram at locally.raised. Until next week.